DW AfricaLink.
I was born in 1983. So when 9/11 happened, I was in my late teens, and like many of us, I couldn't fully grasp the scale of what was unfolding. It was far away, it was surreal, it was something the adults whispered about. Back then, it didn't make much sense to me, but now as a grown person, looking back with the benefit of maturity, I feel something different. Anger, not just at the attacks themselves, but at the ripple effects they set off. Because 9/11 wasn't just an American tragedy, it reshaped the world. And for Africa too, it meant shifts in politics, security, economies, and even how we were seen globally. In this episode, we'll explore 9/11 through the African eyes, discussing what the attacks meant for the continent, how they altered our own realities, and why revisiting this history matters now more than ever. We'll also delve into the role of African media in covering the tragedy, the security implications for Africa, and the lessons we can learn from 9/11. That's what's coming up. Stay tuned. My name is Josey Mahachi. Welcome to AfricaLink, the podcast that connects you to the stories that matter from and on Africa.
AfricaLink, every weekday here on DW.
It was a day that changed the world. September 11, 2001, a moment etched into global memory. But while much of the narrative has centered on American voices, today we shift the lens to Africa. What did 9/11 mean for Africa and how it shaped global politics, media, and identity? In this special episode, we speak to my colleague from DW Swahili Department, Zainabu Aziz. She was a journalist in Kenya and followed the events in New York closely. She was also a victim of the incident that happened at the American Embassy in Kenya in 1998. So she brings a unique African perspective, her experience to the tragedy. Also on the discussion is Fidele Amakye Owusu, a security analyst in Ghana, who will provide insights into the security implications of 9/11 for Africa. And we'll start with you, Fidele. From a political standpoint, how did the September 11 attacks reshape global power dynamics, and where did Africa fit into that shift?
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Firstly, I would like to say that after the end of the Cold War, where the global community came to realize a unipolar world dominated by the United States, the 9/11 or September 11 attack was the next thing that changed the world dramatically. And so politically, even though George Bush Jr. had his own political agenda for the United States, the attack happening at the early or the first year in his administration really made him change course. And his administration that had campaigned on domestic policies or largely domestic policies had to change course and become more of a foreign policy administration, where the US had to change its foreign policy. This meant that what was called a safe havens for terrorists. So the US administration then decided to review the various countries around the world and where conditions allow terrorism to thrive. That alone shaped the world dramatically, because then the US had to engage in a lot of interventionist policies, both overt and covert, against regimes in North Africa, in the Middle East, that eventually ended the invasion of Iraq and other interventions. So that really reinvented the interventionist approach to international foreign policy or international politics. And that really had a lot of ramifications, much of which we are still having to bear with.
And then, Fidele, from what you've just said, what were the immediate reactions from African governments and political institutions following the attacks?
Yes, so as it were, African leaders or African countries saw themselves, especially Sub-Saharan Africa, saw themselves to be far away from the conditions or the factors that had led the September 11th attack. They saw it as a problem between America or the West and the Middle East. And in many of the discussions that emerged among the populace, they felt that it was because of years of interference by the West in the Middle East that has resulted in such a disastrous or such fatal attacks. Again, for the government, they had to be more formal. They sent their condolences. They supported the United States in principle to fight terrorism. Now, the irony of the matter is that, in fact, Bin Laden had started his incendiary activities in Africa. The bombing, the embassy bombings in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam in Tanzania in the 90s. And then his long stay in Sudan when he was expelled from Saudi Arabia. He was based in Sudan, where he engaged in a lot of activities and from where he coordinated the activities of Al-Qaeda in its early stages. So it was more of a U-turn from, or an escalation. That is, after that happened, he was silent for a while until September the 11th of 2001. And so, whereas Africans thought that they were far away from the problem, the issues had already started in Africa. And in North Africa, that was a little different because North African politics is more tied with the Middle East. So in Libya, Egypt, and other places, this was seen as a major occurrence. And governments from these places tend to cooperate with the United States. Even Gaddafi, who had known to be a long-time opponent of the United States, really cooperated with the US fighting terrorism.
Right. Now, Zainab, you are a journalist. If you can just take us back to the morning of September 11, 2001, where were you and what were you doing when you first heard or saw what was happening?
Thank you very much. On this particular day, I was in Nairobi working with the national broadcaster, Kenya Broadcasting Corporation. And I remember this day I was working as usual, and then came this news. So to me, it was a shock. And quickly, it took me back to the bombings of the United States embassies in Nairobi and Dar es Salaam. As I was one of the victims of the bombings in Nairobi, it really gave me this new shock. I was asking myself now, what is this?
Can you take us through that process, that moment when the bombings happened in Kenya?
Yes, I was close to the embassy. I had just dropped into town on my way to work on this particular day, on the 7th of August, 1998. And then as I just crossed the road towards the American embassy, the former American embassy where it was, I happened to see a couple who are my friends, old couple from Mombasa. So I just went straight to them. They were queuing outside. Long time people used to queue outside before you get inside the embassy. And I had just gone to greet them and just inquire. They told me they were waiting to get inside to get their visas as they were supposed to travel to the United States for their graduation of their daughter. A few minutes, a soldier just came to me and said, Madam, can you please leave? If you have no business here, then you're not supposed to be here. So it was I would say, luck on my side, because as I left only some few meters from where I was with this couple, and then this boom came. Glasses were falling over, and everybody didn't know what to do. And as I say, I'm one of the victims because
you were right there.
I was right there and I was hurt. The glasses also pierced in my face, on my body, and other people were falling down. And all of a sudden, everybody was so terrified, and it was quite a shock. Whenever I remember this day, this incident, it's quite chilling.
And just to divert a bit from the 9/11, so what happened to these couples, or is just humanity? Did they
Yeah,
survive?
I'm sorry to say they did not survive. Plus the soldier who made me get away from the place.
I'm sorry to hear that. Now, obviously, yes, hearing now that's 1998 into 2001, you're obviously seeing this happening again. It just brought back
Exactly.
the memories. But then only to also to find out, in your opinion, how the American media covered the attacks compared to African media outlets at the time. Were there differences in tone, focus, or framing that you noticed?
To me, I think on my take, I would say yes, because I take it like the American media was busy giving this message, what the American government wanted us to hear. And yet we had our own problems. And maybe this terrorism problem in 2001 or from 1998 was like something new, which we were trying to get used to.
Right. And did you contribute to any coverage for African audiences?
Yes.
If you did, just to find out what angles did you prioritize? How did you make it different from the African American media? How did you make the story relevant to your readers or listeners back home?
Yes, we did, because we tried our level best to take this angle first, to let the people of our countries, or the people in my country, to understand that terrorism is real, it's here with us, and then taking the listeners or viewers back to 1998, when Kenya and Tanzania were affected,
Mm.
and then let people who went through these problems in 1998, give them airtime so that they can also speak to the world, to our people, to African countries, and also putting forward government measures.
Still with you, Fidel, did the 9/11 influence African countries to think their own security policies or counterterrorism strategies?
What 9/11 did was, one, for propaganda purposes, it supported Al Qaeda very up there. In fact, it shot it up in terms of credibility in the terrorism world. And what happened was that then it gave Bin Laden credibility. And the result was, for instance, Al Shabaab pledging its allegiance to Al Qaeda. Because before September 11, Al Shabaab and its adherents were already there, but they were fighting more of an internal political battle with other factions in Somalia, and not necessarily towing the line of Al Qaeda. But eventually, they threw their weight behind, or pledged allegiance to Al Qaeda. And ever since then, the group has become more ferocious, indiscriminate with their attacks, and currently causing a lot of havoc in Somalia and even beyond, because they've launched attacks in eastern Ethiopia, and then in Kampala, that is Uganda. So, and then Kenya. What happened in the mall some time ago, and other things. So all these groups are then becoming, taking the cue from Al Qaeda to become more ferocious and more fatal to African communities. Currently, we have the epicenter of global terrorism be in West Africa. So you talk of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, and you are talking about the epicenter of global terrorism currently. But at the time of September 11, that was far off. Nobody was even thinking about terrorism in the Sahel. And these are some of the consequences that we have. And this has displaced thousands of people. Even in Central Africa, which is known to have more sub-state and interstate clashes, we have IS, that is Islamic State affiliate, known as the ADF, Allied Democratic Forces, in the DRC. So after 9/11, a lot has happened, and it has not been in the interest of Africa.
Right. Not being in the interest of Africa, Fidel, still with you. There's a lot of policy changes as well in the US as we speak. speak today, but at that time, how did U.S. foreign policy towards Africa change in the aftermath of 9/11, especially in terms of military cooperation, surveillance, aid, you name it?
As I mentioned earlier, George W. Bush Jr. did not have any intention of becoming an interventionist politician, because in his campaign, he was campaigning on domestic policies. But 9/11 changed his approach. And Africa, the second largest landmass on earth, could not be ignored, especially when most of the countries were classified as weak states, some of whom did not have presence in part of their territories. For instance, you went to Mali, and the northern Mali is, a whole vast desert where any non-state actor, armed non-state actor, can operate. And currently we see that. So at the time, these weak states, the US classified what we call weak states, and many of them were in Africa. They realized that weak states created the vortex that pulled extremists to operate. Because you are weak and because you cannot control your territory effectively, it attracted rogue actors like terrorists who find space and then build bases within. So they took a cue from Bin Laden's stay in Sudan long before 9/11, and then they realized that they needed to support African militaries, like giving them training, equipment, and things like that. Now, states that were seen to be non-cooperative or that were not willing to cooperate were seen as rogue states. And at a point, they were giving us access of evil and things like that. And the subsequent overthrow of Gaddafi in 2011 was, even though it happened much later, was linked to such ideas that his actions could give rise to terrorism. However, despite his removal, we still have Libya as a fragile state that can, create space for terrorist activities. So these meant that African countries had become a major entities where the US wanted to deal with or cooperate with in order to stop terrorism. That did not only go with hard politics or the use of force, but it also went with soft power projection in terms of giving financial support like malaria, MCC, that's the Millennium Challenge Corporation, giving support to African countries like Ghana and other countries like Nigeria and others. So the US combined both soft and hard power in order to influence how domestic politics prevented terrorism in Africa.
Right. Now, Zainab, just to turn back to you, still on journalism and obviously how the media approached these very sad incidences in the world. How did this experience shape your own career or your approach to journalism and storytelling?
Well, for me, it is very important to go along with what is happening in the world. My take, I would say, it is always best to look on both sides. Just like Mr. Fidele Amakye Owusu spoke about, depending on the West, how they would like to put the message out. So probably that message does not relate with the realities in our countries. So it is always at best to look at these two things before we start telling our stories.
But what message would you share with younger African journalists who didn't live through 9/11 but are covering global crisis today, remembering also even those 5 journalists from Al Jazeera who lost their lives, Zainab?
I would encourage younger journalists to be more on the lookout, research, get to understand, because we need to learn every single day. Every single day, a journalist has to have information, correct information. In this world today, we are in trouble because of fake news and all this. So they have to be very careful, not just to take reports simply because somebody has put it on social media or what. They have to research, and they really have to look on the realities on the ground, which is very, very important in order for them to relay the message across.
Thank you.
Right. As we wrap up our discussion, you still have the mic, Fidel. Did the attacks lead to increased scrutiny or stigmatization of certain African regions or groups, particularly those with Muslim populations?
Yes. In fact, when the attackers were boarding the flight within the United States to cause that harm, some of them had transparent bags or bags that would never, the ones that they held were in transparent bags that they would ordinarily go through the checkpoints and nothing would happen because we did not have September 11 at before that time when they were boarding the flight to cause September 11. So it has changed, especially aviation travel. I mean, these days you are traveling and you have to get off your shoes, your socks, and sometimes after all this thorough search, some people are still taken off the queue to be searched further. This tells us that a lot has changed after that. Because after that, we had some shoe bombing attempts, some underpants bombing attempts, and things like that. So it has become very serious. And anyone who travels around the world or has ever traveled from one place to another, boarding a flight, has gone through such cavity searches, and that is so uncomfortable. So that in itself is a major change. Again, it has also changed global politics tremendously. And I also think that we are entering into a post-September 11th era because after 2 decades, we are beginning to forget some of it. For instance, Vladimir Putin was one of the first people to call the US president, George W. Bush, when this thing happened. And Russia decided to cooperate with the United States to fight terrorism. Because recently, Russia itself was attacked by IS group in southern Russia. So it was a global fight. But currently, it looks like the international struggle, the new international, what we call the new Cold War that is emerging, and which Africa has become once again become a theft, is moving countries away from cooperating towards the fight against terrorism. That is what I see currently. And I think that international policy leaders or global politicians should bring this to the fore again because the issue is getting worse. We don't want to believe that it is so because now Africa is the new epicenter of terrorism, so nobody cares anymore. We don't want to think like that. So I think that much cooperation still needs to be forged in order to fight terrorism effectively. Thank you.
Right, right. And Zainab, now your parting words. If you had to summarize 9/11 experience in one word or phrase, what would it be and why?
Very bad. It should not be allowed to happen. Because this world belongs to us all. Let's make it a peaceful place. In short, I would say, let peace, love, and unity prevail. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zainab. Aziz, let love lead, let peace lead. And Fidele Amakye Owusu, our security analyst for this discussion. We appreciate you joining us here on DW Africa Link podcast. DW Zainab Aziz and Fidele Amakye Owusu, security analyst in Ghana, many thanks for joining us. As we look at the wars burning across the world today, the lesson of 9/11 for Africa and for all of us is clear. Violence breeds more violence, fear breeds more fear. What we need is the courage to choose peace, to protect life, and to build a world where no one's tragedy becomes another's excuse for endless war. Let's take inspiration from the resilience shown in the aftermath of 9/11 and strive for a world of peace, love, and understanding. That's it for this edition of Africa Link. Remember, you are not just a listener, but a crucial part of our community, and your engagement can shape the direction of our discussions. We value your insights and encourage you to share your thoughts with us. Remember, you can find all of the Africa Link podcast episodes on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen to your podcasts from. We look forward to hearing from you and continuing this important conversation. This episode was co-produced and edited by Isaac Mugabi. My name is Josey Mahachi. Thanks for listening. Until the next one, It's bye for now.
DW, made for minds.